Colonel Ben had served his country for more than 25 years. He was known for his steady walk, calm voice, and strong sense of duty. He did not speak loudly, and he did not demand attention. People respected him because he earned that respect with years of honest work and quiet leadership. He had led many missions, trained many young soldiers, and carried the weight of many difficult days without complaint. On this morning he stood inside a quiet military room beside a long flag-covered case. Inside that case rested the remains of a young soldier named Leo. Leo had fallen during service far away from home. Ben had promised Leo's family that he would personally escort him back. It was not written in any order. It was a promise from one human to another. Ben stood straight as the honor guard prepared the case for transport. His hands were slow and steady as he adjusted the flag one final time. His eyes were calm, but inside his chest his heart carried heavy emotion. Leo had been only 22 years old, full of plans and dreams. He had talked often about his mother and sister. He had spoken about returning home and building a simple life. Now Ben was bringing him home in this quiet form. The flight was scheduled early in the afternoon. A special cargo space had been prepared for the case. Ben would fly with him and make sure nothing went wrong. Everything was simple and clear. Or so it seemed. The drive to the airport was silent. The military vehicle moved smoothly along the road. Trees passed by the windows. The sky was pale blue with soft clouds. Ben did not speak. He kept his eyes forward and his thoughts inside. He replayed his last conversation with Leo again and again. The young soldier had been nervous before his final mission. Ben had placed a hand on his shoulder and told him to trust his training. Leo had smiled and nodded. At the airport, the vehicle stopped near a restricted area. Workers and security staff moved with quiet focus. The case was lifted with care and placed onto a transport cart. Ben followed closely beside it. His uniform was clean and his medals rested carefully on his chest. He carried himself with dignity and purpose. As they reached the airline service counter, a young staff member stepped forward. Her face was polite but unsure. She checked the documents and then looked at Ben again. Her eyes moved from his face to his uniform to the case behind him. She hesitated. Then she said something that made the air feel heavy. She said that the flight crew had concerns about allowing this escort on board. Ben did not understand at first. He asked calmly what the concern was. She avoided his eyes and said there was a sudden change in policy. She said escorts were not always approved for this flight. Ben showed the official clearance. He showed the military travel authorization. Everything was correct. Everything was in order. Still she stepped back and called for her supervisor. A few moments later a tall man arrived. His badge said he was the duty manager. He looked at the papers quickly and then at Ben. His eyes rested on Ben longer than needed. He said that only one escort was expected, but there had been an unexpected issue. He said there was a concern about seating and boarding. Ben answered calmly that he did not require any special seat. He only needed to stay with the case. The manager folded his arms and said that the decision had already been made. The case would go on the flight, but the escort would have to wait for the next available one. Ben felt his jaw tighten slightly. He asked for the reason again. The manager gave vague answers. He spoke of weight limits and last-minute changes. None of it made sense. Ben had escorted fallen soldiers before. This was not new. Other staff members stood nearby watching quietly. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked curious. Ben looked at the case behind him and imagined Leo alone in the cargo space without anyone he knew nearby. He said quietly that he would not leave the case alone. He had given his word to the family. He had given his word to Leo. The manager's face hardened. He said they had rules and he was only following them. Ben asked to speak to someone higher. The manager said there was no need. The silence between them felt thick. Finally the manager spoke again and his words fell with cold weight. He said that the issue was not the case. It was the escort. Ben understood at that moment that something was wrong in a deeper way. He had faced danger many times in his life, but this moment cut in a different place. He stood still with his hands at his sides and his back straight. He asked the man to repeat what he meant. The manager looked around briefly and then said in a low voice that there had been complaints from some crew members about working too closely with certain individuals on board. He did not say the word openly. He did not have to. Ben saw the meaning clearly in the man's eyes. For a long moment Ben did not speak. His heart beat evenly but slower than usual. He felt not anger but disappointment settle inside him. He had worn this uniform for decades. He had served alongside people of every background. He had carried wounded soldiers through dust and fire. He had buried friends and mentors. And now he was being told quietly that he was not wanted beside a fallen soldier because of who he was. He asked the manager if the case would fly without him. The manager nodded. Ben said quietly that this was wrong. The manager said it was final. Workers began to move the case toward the loading area. Ben stepped forward to follow, but two staff members shifted into his path gently but firmly. The action was small, but the meaning was heavy. Ben stood still. People around watched silently. Some lowered their eyes. Some looked disturbed. No one spoke loudly. Ben lifted his hand slowly and rested it on the flag one last time. He leaned forward slightly and whispered a promise that only he could hear. "I will not leave you alone." Then he stepped back as the case was rolled away. The flight gate closed soon after. Ben stood alone near the service counter. The sound of the airport returned around him. Rolling luggage footsteps, quiet voices, and overhead announcements. Life moved on as if nothing important had just happened. But something important had happened. Ben walked slowly out of the restricted area and took a seat near the windows. His hands rested on his knees. His face was calm but his thoughts were heavy. He had followed every rule. He had shown every document. He had spoken with respect. Still he had been denied. Across the terminal, a middle-aged woman sat watching him quietly. She had seen everything from a distance. She had seen the case. She had seen the uniform. She had seen the way the staff blocked his path. She stood up slowly and walked toward him. She asked gently if he was the escort for the fallen soldier. Ben looked up and nodded. She said she worked for the airline in customer support. She had seen the act and it did not sit right with her. She asked if she could help. Ben told her calmly what had happened. The words were steady but the meaning was heavy. The woman listened without interrupting. When he finished, she took a slow breath and said he should come with her. She led him to a quiet office near the back of the terminal. Inside she made 2 calls. She spoke with serious tone. She used words like authorization and clearance and discrimination policies. Her voice grew firmer with each sentence. After several minutes she ended the call and looked at Ben with a mix of anger and respect. She said that what happened was wrong and did not follow company rules. She said a report would be filed immediately. She said higher officials had been contacted. Ben thanked her but said quietly that the flight had already left. The woman nodded and said she knew. Ben stood and adjusted his uniform. He said he would take the next available flight and meet the case on the other side. The woman promised that she would personally follow up. She said this would not be ignored. Ben walked back into the open terminal. He stood beside the large window and watched the distant plane grow smaller in the sky. Somewhere inside that plane Leo traveled alone. Ben closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered Leo's smile. He remembered the promise. And deep inside he made a new one. This would not end here. Ben did not leave the airport after the plane took off. He remained seated near the large window watching the busy ground crews move across the wide field. Planes arrived and left as if nothing special had happened. People laughed, walked, rushed, and spoke into phones. Life moved forward without pause. But inside Ben, everything felt still. He checked his watch once. Not because he was impatient, but because he measured time differently now. Every minute that passed was one that Leo spent traveling without him. The promise he had made to the family did not feel broken, but it felt wounded. He was still determined to reach the final destination and stand beside the family when the case arrived. The woman from customer support returned after some time. Her name was Sarah. Her face looked serious. She told Ben that the issue had been reported to senior management. Several supervisors were already questioning what happened at the gate. The manager who denied boarding was being asked to explain his decision. Ben listened quietly. He thanked her for her effort but did not show emotion. He asked only one question. When was the next flight to the same destination? Sarah checked and told him it would be early the next morning. Ben nodded and said he would wait. That evening Ben stayed at a small airport hotel nearby. He sat by the window looking out at the moving lights. He called Leo's mother to explain what had happened. His voice remained steady, but the words carried weight. The woman did not cry on the call. She listened quietly. When Ben finished, she thanked him for staying with her son in spirit even when he could not be there in body. Her calm strength moved him deeply. Ben slept little that night. Early the next morning, Sarah met him at the terminal again. She walked beside him toward the service area. Her steps were quick but controlled. She told him that overnight the issue had grown. A worker who had witnessed the denial had spoken to another department. That department had contacted a regional office. The story had reached people higher than the local terminal. Ben nodded but stayed focused on his path. He did not seek attention. He wanted only to fulfill his duty. As they neared the counter, they were stopped by a different supervisor. This man spoke with a gentler tone. He welcomed Ben politely and apologized for the trouble. He said the previous manager had acted outside of proper rules. He said the choice to deny boarding had not followed company values. Ben listened without reaction. Words were coming, but the effect of those words would be seen only through action. The supervisor personally cleared Ben for boarding. He ensured that Ben would be seated near the cargo access for escorts. He assigned a crew member to remain available throughout the flight. Ben thanked him briefly. As Ben waited to board, the early news screens near the terminal flashed a quiet headline. It spoke of a formal internal review happening within the airline following a complaint at a regional airport. No names were mentioned. No details yet. It was just a short note for now. But movement had begun. Ben boarded the flight with calm steps. The plane felt quiet in the early morning. Most passengers slept lightly or stared through windows. The crew treated Ben with careful respect. One of them offered to inform him as soon as the case was secured again for the remainder of the journey. When the plane lifted into the morning sky, Ben closed his eyes and pictured the final scene. He would arrive, he would stand beside the case, he would face the family with honesty. That was all that mattered. Hours later the plane touched down. The sun had risen high over the city. Ben moved through the terminal without delay. At the cargo transfer area he waited as the case arrived again on careful hands. When he saw the flag, his shoulders eased slightly. He stood beside it and placed a steady hand on the top. This time he was not pushed back. This time no one stepped in his path. The escort had been restored. But outside the airport something else was happening. On the same morning the airline headquarters requested a full report from the airport. Sarah had already submitted a written explanation. Other workers submitted statements too. The service counter footage was reviewed. The timeline was laid out minute by minute. Every word spoken during the denial was examined. The manager who had denied Ben was called into an office. At first he defended his actions. He spoke of schedules and concerns. But the evidence showed that none of the issues he mentioned had existed. There was no weight problem. There was no emergency. There was no crew conflict on record. The truth began to surface quietly. More witnesses spoke. A ground worker shared that the manager had complained earlier about the escort situation. A crew assistant shared that the manager had warned them before the denial that he would not allow a certain escort to board that day. The pattern became clearer. By the afternoon, the airline suspended the manager pending review. They issued a brief internal note reminding all staff of escort policies and respect guidelines. Another note followed warning of personal bias affecting operations. Still, the story did not stay internal for long. One worker who had grown upset over the event shared what they saw with a local reporter in quiet detail. The reporter asked careful questions. They checked records. Within hours, the reporter confirmed the core of the story through additional sources. That evening, the headline changed. It spoke about an escort denied while honoring a fallen soldier. It spoke of questions raised about fairness and conduct. It did not yet name Ben. But people noticed. People shared the story. By the time Ben arrived at the final destination and met Leo's family outside the arrival hall, the news had already begun spreading. The family stood together holding flowers. Leo's mother stepped forward when she saw the flag. Ben stood straight at her side. He spoke gently and explained the delay. The mother placed her hand on his arm and thanked him. She said she never doubted he would come. The family did not know yet that the delay had become a larger story. They moved together into the waiting vehicle. The quiet journey continued toward the funeral location. Ben remained beside the case the entire time. Later that evening, the family gathered in a small hall preparing for the memorial service. Photographs of Leo covered a table. Childhood moments, laughter days at school, days with friends, days in uniform. Ben stood quietly near the side, watching the family move around. Some guests recognized him from the news on their phones. A few approached and shook his hand with quiet respect. Ben did not seek attention. He only nodded. Meanwhile, back at the airport, the situation continued to grow. The airline released a formal statement that night. They confirmed an internal review was underway. They expressed regret for the experience of the escort. They stated commitment to equal treatment and professional conduct. The public response was immediate. Support messages filled online spaces. Many veterans shared stories of escorts and final honors. Some passengers shared frustration that such a denial could happen. Others expressed shock that someone could be treated differently during a moment of loss. The name of the escort was still unknown to most. But not for long. The next morning, a national outlet released an updated story. It confirmed that the denied escort was a colonel with 25 years of service. His name was not hidden now. His face appeared beside his uniform on screens across the country. Ben did not see the report at first. He was standing quietly beside the family during the memorial service. The room was filled with soft music and silent tears. Leo's mother spoke about her son with strength and pride. The sister spoke about childhood memories. Ben spoke briefly last. He did not speak of the incident. He spoke of Leo. He spoke of courage, discipline, and kindness. When the service ended, many people approached Ben to express thanks. Later that evening, Sarah called him. Her voice held relief. She told him that the airline had acknowledged fault fully. The suspension had been extended while a deeper review continued. The story had reached leadership levels that rarely paid attention to one airport incident. Ben listened quietly. She said she was proud that she had spoken up. Ben thanked her sincerely. He did not celebrate. He did not show anger. He only felt a quiet sense that truth was finally being heard. But the real regret for the airline had only begun. Because what they did not know was that someone else had also been watching that day at the counter. A man who held greater authority than anyone in the terminal. And he was not silent. While the airline faced growing pressure from the public and internal leadership, another figure had been watching quietly from the beginning. His name was David Grant. He was the regional operations director for several major airports, including the one where Ben had been denied escort clearance. On the day of the incident, David had been traveling through the terminal without notice. He often did this to understand real working conditions without ceremony. He had seen the flag-covered case from a distance. He had seen the colonel standing tall beside it. He had seen the hesitation at the counter. And he had seen the moment when Ben was quietly blocked from following the case. David did not interrupt at that moment. He believed in observing actions before judging them. But he made a note in his mind that something had gone deeply wrong. That night when the first internal report reached his desk, he read every word with care. When the second and third statements arrived, his concern grew heavier. By morning he already knew what decision he would make. David requested a full emergency meeting at headquarters. Senior leadership gathered believing this would be a routine discussion. They were wrong. David projected the footage from the service counter onto the large screen. No commentary at first. Just the raw moment as it had happened. The delay. The denial. The movement of staff blocking the escort path. The still posture of Ben beside the case. The room stayed silent. Then David spoke. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse loudly. He spoke with precision. He said that in one short moment the airline had failed not only a dedicated colonel but also a fallen soldier and a grieving family. He said that this failure was not only a violation of rules but a violation of basic human respect. No one in the room defended the actions. They could not. The evidence was clear. David ordered the immediate removal of the manager involved from all company authority. He ordered full retraining for the entire service and cargo department involved. He ordered that escort policy would now include mandatory personal supervision from management during such flights. Then he added something unexpected. He said the airline would publicly apologize to the colonel and to the family of the fallen soldier in a direct personal way. Not a general statement. A face-to-face apology. The leadership hesitated. David did not. He said that when trust is broken, it cannot be rebuilt through paperwork. It must be rebuilt through humility. The decision was finalized. That same afternoon David flew to the city where Ben and the family remained. Back at the memorial grounds, Ben continued to remain beside the family as they prepared for the final resting ceremony the next day. The story around him had grown larger, but his focus stayed narrow. He was not a figure seeking recognition. He was still simply an escort fulfilling a promise. That evening a formal vehicle arrived quietly near the hall. A man stepped out in a dark suit without press attention. He approached the family with calm respect. He introduced himself as David Grant from the airline. Ben watched from a distance as David spoke gently to Leo's mother. The woman listened carefully. She nodded slowly. After a moment she turned and gestured toward Ben. David walked toward Ben with steady steps. He stood straight and extended his hand. Ben shook it calmly. David looked him in the eye and said openly that what had happened should never have happened. He said the airline had failed him and failed Leo. He said there were no excuses that justified that failure. Ben listened without interruption. David continued and said the manager responsible had been fully removed from authority. New procedures were now permanent company policy. The airline would personally ensure that future military escorts would never face such treatment again. Then David did something no one expected. He bowed his head slightly. It was not dramatic. It was simple. He said he was sorry. Ben felt something shift inside his chest. Not victory. Not pride. Relief. He nodded once and said that the apology mattered, but the promise mattered more. He said that Leo was the one who deserved honor. David agreed. The following morning the final ceremony was held under a pale gray sky. The ground was still. The air was quiet. The flag was folded with precise hands. Ben stood beside the case until the very last moment. When the ceremony ended, Ben stepped back with steady discipline. Leo's family thanked him again. The sister placed a small card in his hand. Inside the card were simple words. Thank you for never leaving him alone. Ben closed the card and placed it gently inside his uniform pocket. He returned to the city later that afternoon. But his arrival was not quiet anymore. People at the terminal recognized him. Some nodded. Some saluted quietly. Some simply placed a hand over their heart as he passed. Ben did not slow. He did not raise his head. He only walked forward with the same calm dignity as always. That evening another headline filled screens. Airline issues direct apology to military colonel after escort denial. Public response was strong. Veterans groups shared support. Families of service members expressed gratitude. Staff within the airline discussed the changes openly. The event became more than a mistake. It became a lesson. Inside the airline, deeper changes began. The company reshaped escort policy across all branches. New training emphasized dignity during military transport. Managers were reminded that authority came with responsibility, not entitlement. And the man who had made the denial vanished quietly from the industry. Weeks later, Ben returned to his usual duties. Training. Meetings. Quiet leadership. The spotlight faded, but the memory remained. One afternoon, Sarah visited the base where Ben now worked. She had transferred to another department within the airline. She wanted to thank him personally. She said his quiet strength had given her the courage to speak when she was afraid to interfere. Ben thanked her in return and told her that doing what was right is rarely easy in the moment, but always clear in the end. David continued to check in through official channels. The changes stayed in place. The apology had not been symbolic. It had been real. Months passed. The fallen soldier Leo came to be remembered not only by his family, but by those who knew the story of the escort who refused to leave him behind even when blocked. His name became attached to quiet stories of dignity across several bases. Ben never shared the story himself. Others shared it for him. One evening Ben stood alone outside the base as the sun fell behind the horizon. The sky glowed faint gold. He removed the folded card from his pocket and read the words again. Thank you for never leaving him alone. He placed the card back against his heart. Somewhere inside that simple line he carried everything that mattered. Duty, honor, and the truth that one act of denial can awaken many acts of courage. But the full regret for the airline had not been in punishment or news reports or public apology. Their real regret was realizing that in one quiet moment at a service counter they had almost erased the final dignity of a young soldier's journey home. And because of one steady colonel who refused to walk away, that mistake became a turning point instead of a stain.